Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, April 26, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the battleground state of Georgia, a state that is going to be hotly contested ahead of the 2022 midterm elections, and we actually just got an announcement today from Doug Collins, a prominent Republican in the state of Georgia, that has announced today that he will not run for the Senate or governor, pretty much clearing the pathway for one candidate in specific in the Senate race. Now, I think it's fairly interesting that Doug Collins has announced he's not running for literally anything. Doug Collins was the runner-up in the 2020 Senate election on the Republican side, so one might expect that he would try to have a political future, especially in a year 2022, which is expected to be a red wave year by many members of the right wing. And I think it should be surprising that he is not running for governor or Senate. Now, Doug Collins is someone who probably could have done well in a Senate primary or governor primary, even against Herschel Walker or Brian Kemp. But at the end of the day, it does come down to who has the president's support, and it does not look as if Doug Collins has the president's support, at least in the Senate race. The governorship just seems to be a position where Doug Collins might not necessarily want to run against Brian Kemp in 2022, potentially in the future, though. I think Doug Collins certainly is going to look for a political future, but he says he's not running for any office in 2022. In fact, he was a representative in the United States House of Representatives, so he had some type of elected position before, but now he's not running for anything, not even trying to return to his old seat. So let's take a look at this 2022 Senate race and why it's so important. When you're looking at the Senate election in Georgia, we've seen the possibility of a number of returning candidates. You see, looking at the publicly expressed interest list, we saw Kelly Loeffler, not Brian Kemp, David Perdue, and Doug Collins, three people who ran for Senate back in 2020. And the thing is that also, David Perdue actually filed paperwork to run for this Senate race and then a week later decided against it, I think largely because he realized he would not have the president's support. Then Kelly Loeffler rolls around and says she's considering running for Senate yet again. And then Doug Collins, for the longest time, had his name in there, feeding into the interest that he might actually run for Senate. But then officially announcing today, and we can take a look at his Notes app type of press release. I thought it was fairly interesting that he released it looking like this, but it says, "I am announcing today that I will not be a candidate for any office in the next election cycle. It has been a joy to serve in both the Georgia legislature and the United States Congress during my time as Congress, So he pretty much, went through what he does, what he stands up for, and pretty much says, thank you for all your kindness and you encouraging me to run for office this cycle. Your support and love will never be forgotten. I look forward to seeing you all in the future." So he's certainly going to run for something in the future, but he's not going to run for something in 2022. And I think this comes as a direct result of Donald Trump endorsing Herschel Walker before Herschel Walker announces that he's running. Now, after the Trump endorsement, Herschel Walker says, you're going to have to wait and see, not denying the claims that he's running for Senate, but not confirming them either. But when you say, let's wait and see, instead of denying it, chances are you are running for United States Senate. And Herschel Walker, someone who is largely well known in the state of Georgia, might be this celebrity type candidate that could run on the Republican Party side. But you do have to recognize that celebrities don't always win races. Herschel Walker is still going to be up against a moderately popular senator and is going to be facing off in a year that might not necessarily be as favorable for the GOP as he thinks. And Donald Trump's endorsement actually might weigh him down. The fact that Donald Trump might be the sole reason why Herschel Walker is considering running for United States Senate might be warning sign number one for the GOP, that they're going to rerun a Trump-like candidate and at the end of the day end up losing. And I think that also the reason why Doug Collins is removing himself from this race is the fear of embarrassment. Back in 2020, he lost to Kelly Loeffler, receiving only 19.95% of the vote in the first round. That's something that he probably wasn't expecting to do. If you look at the preliminary election data during the 2020 regular election, the jungle primary, Doug Collins was actually leading and doing better than Kelly Loeffler in a number of polls, almost consistently. In fact, it was going to end up being between Doug Collins and Matt Lieberman, and it ended up being between Kelly Loeffler and Raphael Warnock. Matt Lieberman really only did well because of name recognition, but then Raphael Warnock was endorsed by a number of top Democrats and went from being, 10, 16, 9, 14% to the next United States senator from the state of Georgia. Isn't that interesting? But Doug Collins very well could have become the next senator from the state. Kelly Loeffler was relatively unknown, but then she started to take a turn into becoming the pro-Trump candidate, the overwhelming Trump candidate, touting her 100% Trump voting record, bashing Doug Collins for, get this, and yes, this is a real attack from the Kelly Loeffler campaign on Doug Collins for endorsing Mitt Romney back in 2012. When Mitt Romney was the Republican nominee, Doug Collins endorsed him for obvious reasons, and Kelly Loeffler attacked him for it. And if you're looking at the polling data, you will see that pretty much, you see Doug Collins, Matt Lieberman, who started out initially large, Matt Lieberman up there, Doug Collins up there, Doug Collins leading all the way until around July, where he was tying with Kelly Loeffler and ultimately lost to her on Election Day. And you'll see the huge significant dip for Matt Lieberman as well. So Collins and Lieberman were the top two, and neither of them ended up advancing to the runoff election. That's got to be at least a little bit embarrassing. But I'm not going to say that Doug Collins isn't running solely because of a poor performance back in 2020. If you're looking at the 2022 primary data, the only polls we have so far show that Herschel Walker and Doug Collins tie or are around even. And in the one-on-one race here between Herschel Walker and Doug Collins, we find out that Herschel Walker wins by 14 points. The only way Doug Collins could win is actually not even by win, but tying. Now, I don't trust the Trafalgar Group data 100%, but it's amongst Republicans, and they do typically, skew to the right, so that doesn't really matter. But I think that also there's a narrative being built here that Herschel Walker, the Trump-backed candidate, anyone who is backed by President Trump, will do better than the non-backed by President Trump candidates. So that means Doug Collins and Herschel Walker, if against each other, the Republican Party in Georgia will likely go with the one that was already endorsed by Donald Trump, in this case being Herschel Walker. And Herschel Walker does much better than Kelly Loeffler, and then between Doug Collins and Kelly Loeffler, you actually see Doug Collins ahead, largely because Kelly Loeffler lost, but she still receives 24% of the vote, which was actually enough to put her over the top back in 2020. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in this Senate race. It's going to be quite an interesting showing. I think that the Senate race will unfold and probably will end up being a Herschel Walker versus Raphael Warnock race. And again, it's all about building the narrative. When Doug Collins' campaign or potential campaign realizes, based off the Trafalgar Group, which I would not deem a respectable pollster for the state of Georgia, they missed the mark by a mile. They predicted Trump would win Georgia by 7 points, but that's besides the point. Trafalgar Group says that Warnock defeats Collins, that Warnock defeats Loeffler, but loses to Walker. So the Collins camp and those closest to him might be looking at this and saying, well, just to be honest, they probably trust this data. And they're saying, well, we lose to Warnock. Loeffler loses to Warnock. But you know who doesn't? Herschel Walker. And if the Republican Party is playing 2022 safe, they want to truly be in the best position possible, they need to win Georgia. They cannot win the Senate majority without Georgia. They can try to win Arizona, but I can tell you now, the Democratic Party is going to try to pick up a state in 2022. And chances are they will get it. The Democrats are currently at 50 right now. I'm going to characterize the remaining Republican states, and then we're going to actually see why Georgia matters the most, probably, out of many of these swing states. With Georgia being at the front and center of political focus, the Democratic Party is going to be funneling a lot of money into that race. The thing about Arizona is that Arizona was closer in 2016 than Georgia was. The shift from Georgia from 2016 to 2020 was larger than the shift of Arizona to 2020. Arizona has had this incremental shift towards the left election year after election year, and even went blue in 2018 on the House level and on the Senate level, whereas Georgia did not. So Georgia is a relatively newer blue state and is certainly on the target list because they had a runoff election in 2021 versus Arizona, which was won outright on Election Day. So Georgia, a Senate race that was up for grabs back in both of these, Arizona and Georgia. Arizona was won by 2.4%, and Georgia was won by around 2 points. So it's a narrower margin in Georgia, which means it's probably easier to pick up, at least the GOP would expect it to be. But without Georgia, I can tell you now the GOP is not winning back the Senate majority because even if they carry Arizona, chances are the Democrats will win either Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, or North Carolina. And we actually are seeing another announcement, which I will cover tomorrow in Ohio, which should, add some spice to what's going to be probably a pretty boring race. So we'll probably not cover Ohio too in depth, but we are going to see an announcement today or tomorrow that is worth covering. But I think that without Georgia, I think this would be the easiest pickup for the GOP, and if they aren't getting it, they're probably not winning back the Senate majority. The 2022 Senate map is the most favorable map for the Democratic Party out of all three of them, and they are lucky that in a year that is expected to be a red wave year, they have this Senate map, because they can hold on to some states while picking up others and counteract it and balance it to a point where it's back down to 50-50. So with Doug Collins not running, I also think that this might screw over the Republican Party in terms of electability. The thing about Doug Collins is that in 2020, he was not viewed as this radical, super pro-Trump candidate. That was Kelly Loeffler. Kelly Loeffler was the target of media attention. Doug Collins barely received any of that. And while that may have been the reason why he didn't win the primary, if he faced off against Raphael Warnock, there would be a lot less to bring up against Doug Collins versus Kelly Loeffler. In addition, I also do want to say that now Doug Collins has taken a significant turn in favor of being pro-Trump. I think he is trying to line himself up for a future Senate, House, or governor bid. But right now, he's not going to be running. He's just not. He doesn't want to run for United States Senate. He also does not want to run for United States governor. If you looked at those who were under the potential list, you had Doug Collins. Brian Kemp is already running, and he might actually face some interesting opponent, Vernon Jones, a former Democrat who switched to the Republican Party and endorsed President Trump. So he might be a potential challenger to Brian Kemp in the Republican primary, but it's not going to be Doug Collins. And Brian Kemp is at the top of the target list for President Trump, so I'm surprised that Doug Collins isn't running against him out of pure political opportunism. But then again, Doug Collins might view that as either it will go great and he'll become a governor in the state of Georgia, or he'll lose the primary and be pushed out by the more moderate members of the Georgia GOP as the wave of Trumpism starts to dissipate, or at least what is expected to dissipate. But now I really, can't imagine what's going to happen in this governor race. We probably won't see Brian Kemp face off against a major opponent. Vernon Jones might get the Trump endorsement here. It's certainly not going to be Brian Kemp getting that endorsement unless there's a super significant change in heart from President Trump. But on the Senate level, that's what all eyes are on. That's what I'm focused on. That's what you are probably focused on. This Senate race could single-handedly determine Senate control. And now the race is clear. And I think it's also interesting that Herschel Walker, someone who hasn't lived in Georgia for a very long time, is now the front runner, all because of President Trump's endorsement. All because President Trump put his foot down and tipped the scale a little bit in favor of Herschel Walker. Before, this was a consideration of whether or not Doug Collins was going to run. Doug Collins was the immediate frontrunner before Herschel Walker. Doug Collins probably would have won this Republican primary. But because President Trump wants to see a celebrity, non-politician-esque type candidate again, the same way Trump was one, we might see a repeat of the 2020 runoff or the 2021 runoff election where the Democratic Party wins. Herschel Walker will certainly be a formidable opponent, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Warnock is a done deal. In fact, I think Warnock will still start out with the advantage. Pundits also agree with me. The thing about Georgia Democrats is that when you're looking at the state and the way that they're looking at some of these parties in both sides, the Democrats versus the Republicans, the Democratic Party is viewed significantly higher, liked by a lot more of the constituency than the Republican Party. This is largely due to the Capitol insurrection, due to the baseless claims of election fraud in the state of Georgia. So many things piled on the GOP that they weren't able to receive the same popularity rating that they had had for the past few decades in the state of Georgia. It's down to an all-time low. The Democratic Party, however, is at an all-time high. Raphael Warnock has a 54% approval rating to a 37% disapproval rating. So Warnock is not going to be easily defeated, I can tell you that. While Walker may be viewed as this outsider and different type of candidate, those don't always win. The pro-Trump candidates lost in 2021. Both of them. Those who closely tied themselves to the former president or the incumbent president at the time ended up losing in Georgia. So Herschel Walker, now that Doug Collins has dropped out, is obviously the frontrunner. And he's going to have a very tricky pathway to the general election. Is he going to try to adopt the Trump type of style campaigning? Maybe. Will he win? Probably not with that style. He's going to need to do a little bit more. He's going to need to look at what Warnock and Ossoff did to defeat Loeffler and Perdue and sort of replicate that on the GOP side. Take the attacks that the Democratic Party did and sort of put that on the Republican side and say, what can we attack the Democratic Party on? Rather than try to solely tap into the Trump base, which clearly is not a winning strategy in Georgia for Trump, for Trump's candidates, whatever, he needs to tap into something different. And he might take a page out of the playing book for the Democrats and try to actually have an issues-based campaign and a voting turnout campaign similar to Stacey Abrams or others across the state. And Kelly Loeffler has also committed herself to forming a get out the vote campaign for the Republicans to counteract the work being done by Stacey Abrams. So all in all, Doug Collins not running means he's not running for any office. No consideration of the governor, House, or Senate. This comes after an endorsement of President Trump endorsing Herschel Walker for the Senate. The polling data is not favorable in the general election or in the primary election, so he probably isn't too confident about this anyway. And also, he had just lost in 2020. Chances are you don't want to rerun a losing candidate. You can ask John James or Martha McSally. Sometimes they don't win, and they typically don't win overall. And Perdue did a very similar thing in 2022 for this race by filing paperwork, have every intention of running, and then a week later, or a little bit later, announcing that he's not running whatsoever due to whatever reason. Just not running because he doesn't think it's right for him or his family doesn't want him to. Whatever it might be, he is no longer running, and neither is Doug Collins. So it should be very interesting. I hope that we see an official Herschel Walker announcement soon so we can actually get a better idea of which candidates are running. But you can still see here that under the publicly expressed interest column, there are still some people besides Walker that might want to run for Senate, including Kelly Loeffler, Drew Ferguson, Buddy Carter, and potentially a number of more candidates on the Republican side. It's going to be a very competitive race. Many Republicans might view it as an opportunity, and we still have to see who the nominee is going to be. But right now, my bet is on Herschel Walker. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.